So, hello and welcome, guys. We have Cyber Diaries podcast episode 21. We have another amazing guest in our studio. We have Shaun Peapell from Rootshell Security. So, I guess first of all, Shaun, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here, Maris. It's always a pleasure to meet someone like yourself in the industry. It's good to have a good chat, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's I'm always fascinated, by leaders in various types of cybersecurity niches and industries, how their ideas evolve. So, I guess first of all, if we start with, if you can just paint a bit of a picture, what do you do for Rootshell? What is Rootshell? And
Yep.
if we can sort of, review the service offering, and then we can dive into a bit of a, I guess, overview of what we're thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question. So my name is Shaun Peapell. So essentially, I am the vice president of the global threat services. So I look after everything globally, as the title kind of suggests. Within my remit, I actually have a very strong penetration testing team. And I also have a client engagement team, which also manages that project management and operational side. So it kind of synergistically all comes together under one umbrella, which works really, really well. Obviously, there are a number of other departments that exist, within Rootshell. On paper, Rootshell's been around probably about 4 or 5 years. Any of those sleuths that go to company's house could quite quickly establish that. But I think when you look at the leadership team, the people that are in the overall Rootshell team, including myself, we've been together for many years. In fact, going back to Genesis, I think the first company was Pentura, which I joined back in 2012. And the leadership team are still here today at the helm, the wheelhouse of Rootshell. It's just through acquisitions and the way we've meandered through the industry and where life has taken the business is where we are today. So, those who may know us, we were Pentura back in the day when I joined back in 2012. But before that, was an acquisition with IntelliSecure around about 2015. Then we splintered off into 3GRC, which was acquired by Prevalent. And then there was an opportunity for it all to come full circle, and we all came back together as one entity, which is Rootshell today. And that was just literally before the late unpleasantness when we had the COVID kind of lockdown. So we had quite a bit of headwind when we first started with Rootshell, trying to build the reputation rather. And you can imagine trying to bring that brand awareness, moving away obviously from IntelliSecure, Pentura, etc. But Rootshell was the thrust forward. But here we are today, still punching hard, and still moving on with business, I guess.
Yeah, I think it sort of pen testing is always, I guess, the industry that is there to kind of withstand, I guess, the technological advantages, I guess, or maybe take the benefit of it. But I guess if we segue into, I guess that's probably interesting conversation to explore. Now, I kind of call it, I guess everyone's talking about this sort of AI arms race, and obviously technology coming to replace people. I'm always very hesitant because I don't like organizations that are developing AI tools that are trying to replace people. I think that's a wrong way to go about it. I think AI can enhance people to do and achieve more. But I guess what's your guys' viewpoint in sort of pen testing and how this sort of new wave of AI, whether it's going to help or hinder the testing sort of landscape in the world?
Okay, so you've opened Pandora's box there with me a little bit.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, I've got lots of love for AI, but I've also got lots of concerns, especially with transitioning from what was Web 1, Web 2, and we're moving into Web 3. Machine learning, AI is definitely what Web 3 is all about. So it's definitely a place, and it's the way the world is going, and we have to adopt that. It's not about, is it a case of do we want to adopt? We have to adopt it, and we have to find room for it and move forward and grow with it. In the realms of sort of penetration testing the world I'm in, we embrace AI on a number of levels. Within the platform, the Rootshell platform, AI is massively going to work with certain algorithms as well as sort of, that human sort of analysis, which also goes for that validation. But AI plays a very key role in identification of, exploitable items, which we'll go into, I'm sure, a bit later on in this podcast. But also when I'm looking at the ground level with the testers themselves, the consultants, where before back in the day when I was training to be a pen tester, there's no such thing as large language models. There was no way of, can you write me a quick script in Python that will let me brute force an SSH service? You can now. So these sort of technologies are available, and it's free. It's all available. it's also great. These large, language models are great for, validation, building out sort of administrative tasks. That heavy grunt and grind that we used to have to do can now be massively adopted with AI. And we do embrace that at Rootshell. It's definitely part of our toolbox. But with the concern side, where before, I guess you had, not bad threat actors, but moving to things like script kiddies and people like this who were probably less, let's say, skilled in utilizing tools or didn't quite have, the knowledge. Therefore, they were probably more curious on what a certain tooling might do, fire it off without any, in fact, being reckless to that point. AI really does elevate their game slightly, because now they can start creating scripts, payloads, and various other bits and bobs, and bypassing that ethical line that sits with AI. There are ways around that. I'm sure everyone's tried and tested that. So mixed bag of feelings. Like I said, Pandora's box, lots to dig into there. But in the main, we leverage it, we utilize it, and we embrace it. I think it's something that's here to stay. And I think, is it going to replace people? I think it replaces elements of what people do. Will it always and everything get replaced? I don't think so. Are there going to be certain roles within the industry that could be not replaced, but almost, it's being more economical, making economies and efficiencies? AI can do a lot of tasks very quickly, a lot faster than a human can. The mundane, the grind. And I think that's the level we should be leveraging at. But hey, look, I'm a science fiction fan as well. We've all seen Judgment Day, right? When Skynet becomes self-aware. So yeah, I'm healthily conscious about that as well. So interested to hear your thoughts, Marius, but that's kind of where we sit, where I sit.
I guess, we don't, I don't want to talk the whole podcast, I guess, about the Pandora box, but one thing I think is very important, I think what we need to address is how people are building skills with AI, because AI is a great tool and a great asset in your toolbox, I think, and it's and it can help you unlock, as you say, loads of different avenues, as you say, write me this script. But the problem I have is the way people have built skills and fundamental knowledge in a yesteryear, they had to understand how concepts work.
Agreed.
Now, if you use the AI, yes, it can give you great output, but what we know what happened with in US when people quoted a made-up law. Now, unless you can verify and you have a way to verifying the output, that's where it becomes very tricky. Because if you're sort of plucking the gaps in your knowledge with AI and you can't necessarily verify it, that's where you can go very shady path where, as you say, you can go down and bypass the ethical boundaries of what you're doing as a pen tester. And I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. And AI, it's not infallible. There's going to be hallucinations. There's going to be false information that it could potentially spit back at you. And like you say, how do you validate that? That is the important thing. I've heard of people asking some really searching questions within ChatGPT, for example, and then carrying out some kind of action on the back of that output. Is that reckless? Is it, is a due diligence required? Maybe. Yes, absolutely. Should we be putting all our trust into these AI language models? Maybe not. Maybe it's some kind of guidance with some kind of, caution, I think, is what's probably required. And in the world at the moment, we've all heard of fake news. We've heard how, things can be leveraged to, build out certain scenarios, and AI can be very, very good at that. AI is going to be very powerful, in the right or the wrong hands. And I think that's what we need to be mindful of here. If it's put to good use and it's validated, it becomes a very, very good tool, which can solve a lot of problems for us as a human race.
Yeah.
But it could also be our, let's say, our downfall if it falls into the wrong hands with the wrong sort of nefarious aims, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to segue a bit into another area. We're talking, testing, penetration testing. I actually made a post today, and I think there's a few people that obviously contributed to it. But I'm always picking up things about what we do as an industry and how regulation sort of develops, and how we build our security programs. Because I see sometimes this pattern in especially in organizations that have, I guess, limited maturity, is usually security becomes sort of a segue or a vehicle to doing just enough to comply with whether it's ISO, whether it's Cyber Essentials. And I think even Greg Vendergast mentioned the other day, because he's creating a new blueprint, saying that, no regulation or certification is going to make your company more secure if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. So where I'm getting at is, for example, ISO and other certification schemes asks you to do a penetration test annually.
Yes.
Now, my main concern and I'm a big advocate of it is that penetration test, similar to risk assessment, as soon as you've done it, it's a point in time assessment, and T minus whatever days afterwards, it deteriorates its validity. So now, how do you interact with clients? How do you, for example, help organizations potentially to bridge the gap between annual testing, or make sure that people understand that you test this application. Now, if you are deploying code, say companies do say bi-weekly or whatever, but nowadays people are deploying code every day. Now, once you tested it, there's a few days afterwards might be the code base completely different, so you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. It's a story we hear all the time. Analogy I use is Schrodinger's cat. If you've ever heard of Schrodinger's cat before.
Yeah.
So this is where they put a cat in a box. No cat was harmed during this demonstration of mine, and they put a radioactive isotope in there and they close the lid. The idea is, can we deduce whether the cat is dead or alive? Actually, we can say the cat is both dead and alive at the same time, but we don't actually know until we lift the lid and measure it and have a look. The same analogy applies to cybersecurity and a lot of other things we do in life. It's about taking regular measurements, continuously testing, stress testing your defenses, making sure that you are keeping a finger on the pulse, as I like to say, that drip of information, having that situation awareness, transitioning from an unknown to a known. It's about understanding what your environment looks like. How often am I doing penetration tests? How often am I doing vulnerability scanning? Am I doing, attack surface management? Am I stress testing? Am I doing red teaming? There's a whole bunch of things I've just mentioned there, but this then all lends itself quite nicely when you start building out a very robust cybersecurity sort of assurance model within your organization. Now, traditionally, like you just mentioned, you do get organizations who are kind of one arm behind the back, we've got to do a pen test because regulatory, we've got to do that, right? Yeah. And that once a year, they tick the box and they move on. Just to bring you a few stats to the table, I remember, I did a webinar not so long ago, and I talked about continuous testing and the value of doing that. I think during 2023, there was over 28,000 CVEs were recorded throughout the whole 12-month period. And when you broke down into those quarters, I think Q1 was around about 7,000. I think the highest was like 7,800 in Q4. But on average, you can work out the math, right? There's about 7,000 new CVEs. And CVEs are, common vulnerability experts. It's what we know about, the known knowns. Yeah. It doesn't account for what we don't know. So you can imagine if you do an assessment, say, in Q1, and you decide not to do another assessment till Q1 the following year, you've potentially missed 21,000 CVEs that we know in your environment. Yep. And this is how, if we can basically, measure an organization across their applications, their infrastructure, their cloud, their people, their process, their technology, we can then have a position where we can start to understand their situation awareness, what their threat universe looks like. Then you can start measuring it. So if you've got a platform or some kind of central point where you can, let's say, aggregate this issue, all these issues, all this data, we can then start asking questions of it. And when you start, having the position to be able to ask questions of your data, you become a very, very powerful proposition. Because at this point, you can then start prioritizing. You can then start saying, well, remediation tracking, what gets fixed first, who's fixing it. One thing that we kind of leverage as a currency is what's called mean time to remediate. How quickly, from the identification of a vulnerability or an issue, can someone get it in front of them, that quick data, put it in front of them, get it out to the right person, get it fixed. It's the time that takes. Now, if we cast our mind back, pull up a sandbag and think, right, legacy pen testing, as I call it now, a tester would turn up potentially on site before we had this remote access, sort of life that we have now. Yep. They would potentially go and deliver a test for a couple of weeks. They would disappear off site, maybe spend another week writing a report, then go through some kind of QA process, and then it'd be disseminated as a PDF, a static one-dimensional report to the end client. Now, at that point, if there are issues that have been identified, maybe there's an understanding with the client that, all criticals and highs come upon the daily wash-up, that's fine, but the devil's in the detail. All those mediums, those lows and informationals, which really are powerful when they're aggregated. The point is, this report hasn't gotten to the end client until probably 3-4 weeks after the initial finding of the issues. So you can see there's a delay. We're actually falling in the face now of actionable, timely, and relevant information. So if we can get that information in front of people a lot quicker, i.e. live reporting, they can start saying, right, I'm going to delegate that job to John in the Wintel team, Marius over in networks, he can have that. I can track that. I can raise tickets for that. Let's get this job moving. Let's get ourselves sound and secure. It's about quick data and moving very quickly. We need to be doing this at the moment. In fact, the appetite moving forward, especially moving to Web3 and the technologies that we're seeing now with AI, we really need to be getting ahead of the curve. There is a headwind here. We need to be forward leaning. So I've got a lot of thoughts in this particular area and how this can be, managed. But definitely, if you can remediate in a timely fashion, work out where and what needs to be prioritized, then you can really start building out like a remediation program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on a couple of things here. There's that I kind of mentioned earlier. There's a proliferation of tools, I guess, who are trying to replace people or trying to inject some automation in sort of testing. We got pen testing as a service. We got breach and attack simulation tools. Now, what's your thoughts? As I say, we need to bridge the gap between annual testing and obviously somewhat, I guess, smaller organizations who cannot afford to do a couple of times a month, I guess, pen testing. Now, are these tools a viable option to bridge the gap between annual or say biannual pen tests?
What's absolutely. Yeah, so I think that lends itself. It goes back to that initial story we talked about Schroders cat. It's about measuring, right? It's about being situationally aware of what's going off in your network. And if I think this is where it's probably a good segue to bring in some, about PTaaS and what penetration testing as a service is as well. This is where we move beyond that pragmatic approach of having that one annual assessment. What we do now is we do that, but then we bring in a number of other repeat assessments with background vulnerability scanning. We're also bringing continuous, EASM or external attack surface management. There is constant enrichment and updating of that information. And where something may not have been exploitable on the day it was found, if we are continually monitoring those results, as in with a platform, if something does become exploitable down the road, it becomes very quickly prioritized for a fix. Now, going back to your point, I'm sorry, I moved away slightly from your sort of automated testing. I think in the toolbox of a tester, there should always be levels of automation because there's lots of grind, big networks, there's a lot of things that can be automated. When we talk about automated exploitation, now we're getting into a different sort of realm. Now, for me, putting the cards on the table, you go look at your industry recognized sort of scanners. We all know them, what typically reside in a pen tester's toolbox. They all do some basic kind of exploitation. They have to validate an issue. Look, let's be honest, right? There's only 3 ways in which you can pwn a host, a person, device, and that is through exploitation, brute force, or deception. These are the 3 ways we can do that. Automated testing in the main could probably do 2 fairly reasonably well, I guess. But I've always got to have one finger on the pulse because as a tester, I'm also, a certified red team manager. I need to make sure that I am legal and I'm also marching along the side of that ethical line. So automated tooling definitely has its place. My concerns are things like moving out of scope. Are there elements which, is control adequate? Or is it going to be exploiting things that, may have a detrimental or impact on the business that you're doing the test against? There are a number of concerns that exist there. But when you start enriching a sort of situation awareness picture about your organization across its apps, infrastructure, networks, etc., its people, process, technology, it should be a blended approach. You should be looking at doing your manual penetration testing. You should be doing your regular cadence of vulnerability scanning. You should be looking at your attack service management, where you're transitioning from those. We talked about the unknown unknowns, known knowns, but there's also a situation called a known unknown, as Donald Rumsfeld eloquently put it. Well, that just means that I know there are things I don't know about. Often, we see, clients may see, okay, Shaun, an external, infrastructure assessment, security assessment I need. I've got 2/29s and I've got a /30. And they give you probably 3 IP addresses. You go, well, that's what's live. So that's all you need to interrogate or investigate. And I'm like, well, no, we don't. We need to look at all of it. you've actually got a net space there that I need to interrogate, because there could be some web server that's span up on there. There could be some FTP server, shadow IT. There could be some kind of, digitally connected, some kind of device which has been kind of daisy chained onto the back of something. These are the things that you need to know. So that's the known unknown element. So when we start piecing this all together, we start building a very comprehensive situation awareness picture. Moving away, like we say, from this one-time project-based siloed sort of penetration test sort of outfits, moving into that bigger area. But to answer your question, automated testing, moving into that breach simulation, there is a place for that. But for me personally, like I mentioned, exploitation, deception and brute force, people, process, and technology. You got to think about all of it.
Yeah.
And you got to measure all of it, because otherwise there are gaps. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's. I just wanted to pick up one point as well. I think it's very important. Sometimes, I'm having conversations, and where you just mentioned the the scannings, whether it's /29, whether it's /30, or whatever it is, I keep organizations, or I see people, these cyber influence. We keep talking about cyber hygiene, cyber basics. The problem is, you can dress it up as much any way you want. The problem is, big organizations are still getting breached because we can't really call them cyber basics or cyber hygiene, because at scale, it's still very hard to achieve. Now, as you say, unless you have a proactive way to measuring things, even things like asset management are very difficult, because when you have an organization of 20,000 people, it's very hard to know when and at what time somebody just built and made something public, and all of a sudden you open a can of worms. So cyber hygiene, cyber basics is still hard to get it right, and it takes a lot of hard work. Now, I just wanted to pick up, I guess, one thing as well. We talked a bit about automation testing. I've heard people, there's obviously organizations who are doing that automation testing, and there was a conversation recently that somebody mentioned about how automation is hard to achieve because, and then somebody said, because people are unpredictable. Now, the people from the company said, who doing automation testing, they're saying, well, not really, you can predict anything. But I guess, what's your thought, when we going towards that sort of automation, do you think that can we predict any foreseeable scenario, or people who been in the industry for a long time still has a skill or knack to find things that potentially automated systems couldn't?
Absolutely. It's called connecting the dots. I'm a former investigator, counterintelligence investigator in military police. So for me, it's always about the evidence, the small bits, the little bits that matter. So, you can go and get, I'm going to say, some industrial scanner might come out with a load of criticals, highs, mediums, lows. But down the bottom there, you've got these informationals. And when you're going into this sort of red team capability, this mature type simulated attack, it's not so much about what systems might be or might not be patched, or what RC might be available on some of these hosts. It's more about what dots can be connected at the bottom. The devil's in the detail, and I've still yet to be persuaded that automation can go through these smaller digital artifacts and make sense of them and weaponize them, if that makes sense. It's about piecing together. You're never going to get rid of that curiosity, that lifting, the kicking the tire, the lifting the stone that a human will have. I think unpredictability, as you said, can you predict things? Well, you can predict anything based on probability, but what level of confidence can you bring that predictability? I could predict something with 20% confidence. That's nothing, right? But I've still predicted something.
Yeah.
But, I'm not trying to shoot anything down here, but for me, if we're going to get to it, the longevity of the human pen tester is here to stay, for now anyway, until they come up with something to replace us. But, when I look at red teams, I look at the criticals, I look at the highs, but I'm thinking, yeah, EDR will probably take care of that. There's that in there. There's that mitigating control. That's been enveloped by this. But what about these little nuggets down here, about this little, this little bucket down here that's probably not authenticated, or there's some, unencrypted sort of files in there, which you're going to go digging to find a password that give you access to a SQL server or something. This is the inquisitive bit. This is about, digging and digging and digging to try and find the information you need to take the next step moving forward, to try and find some kind of weaponized sort of attack path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's also important. I think if you doing is doing this sort of job day in and day out, you quickly understand how things, because sometimes as well from a large text, it's hard to make out how easy and how hard it is something to weaponize or exploit, or what chain of events needs to happen. And also another thing, I think sometimes, I don't know, I haven't seen recently, the sophistication of those tools, but the chaining of vulnerabilities,
Yep.
sometimes people forget. Yes, it can be mediums, but when you chain, say, three mediums together,
Aggregation. Yep.
what happens then is a completely different viewpoint. And
Yep.
and sometimes, some of these things can be left or can be extended, having extended SLAs, but the experience of understanding the chain of events and how these things can be exploited, it's an important
I mean, let's be
thing.
honest, Marius, right? You're going to get risk appetite. You're going to get CISOs that sit in certain chairs. They've got such a busy day. They're probably only interested, got an appetite for criticals and highs. Everything else kind of takes a backseat. But like I said, it's that detail further down that vulnerability identification list that usually gets weaponized by red teamers. It's a devil in the detail, you know? So for me, it's about having that better, full, holistic sort of approach. And does automation do that? I don't think so. If it does, it doesn't quite do it as good as a human yet.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. Sometimes, understanding of even for example, I keep talking about, for example, tooling,
Mm.
um, vulnerability scanning tools. Now, when you go to a decent sized organization, everyone's carrying tens, maybe 20, 30,000 vulnerabilities. Now, I think a big proponent, we need to get to a point of standardization, because, and I'll tell you what, one problem I think I foresee is, now every single vulnerability scanner, they have their own risk aggregation score, which is, if you replace one tool, now all of your vulnerabilities aggregation or funnel to what's important is going to be completely different based on different tools.
Mm-hmm.
So that's again another thing that is hard to understand how these work. But just having that sort of, I think always these tools need a human input or human overview, because of
Mm-hmm.
business context, risk
Yes.
appetite, because risk appetite, again, lots of people sometimes don't comprehend. Risk appetite changes based on your business goals. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you are in a startup, you don't have any, or you have limited competitors, you are land grabbing, you take in more risks because
Of
you
course.
have a growth trajectory. Once you achieve a certain level of maturity, your risk appetite might change.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these factors sometimes need to be counted upon, which tools can't really do for you.
That's right. So it's about environmental sort of contextualization as well. You know, a
Yeah.
scanner doesn't know if an FTP server, clear text, TCP/21 sits on a public facing internet, or it knows it's on a very heavily ACL'd VLAN. It
Yeah.
doesn't know, but the context is there for us as testers to put that consultancy overlay. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That I think unless there is some kind of algorithm that will factor that in when it's saying, right, I'm now testing an internal infrastructure. It is segregated. There are ACLs in place. Only certain privileged users can get access to it. We've mitigated a lot of the problems.
Yep.
Man in the middle attacks are going to be quite low. The risk of that is going to be low. So therefore, we transition from that, probably a red high down to maybe a low at that point because of the contextual realization. And this is something that we do. Just going back to your point about having, different sort of scanners bringing in different perspectives, if you like, persuasions. What we do over here at Rootshell with the platform, we're agnostic. So what we do, we can take, scanner X, scanner Y, scanner Z, and so on and so forth, various other tooling. We bring it all in, and you might be, you're scanning, I don't know, the same device, the same host, the same endpoint with different scanners, get different perspective. We've got what's called a deduplication sort of algorithm with the AI that works with our platform. So it makes sense of your data. We've got some vectoring that goes off, and now you're going to get me into the realms of where the dev guys go into, and that's all numbers, and it just whoa. I'm like, hey, I'll find the vulnerabilities, you manage them. So, but yeah, I mean that problem is managed within our platform because we're able to deduplicate and make sense of all the different sort of scanning information, different way it translates. But contextualization is something that we apply to all of our engagements. I've now introduced some time ago that every report that we create within the platform, there is a contextual sort of advice summary to each test. And we give an overview of what does it really mean? I've got these eyes, I've got these criticals, I've got these mediums, but what does it really mean from a bad threat actor's point of view. What does it really mean to you, Mr. Client? And this is what we try to do, is try and contextualize that. I don't want to be, raising alarm bells, for something that maybe already be mitigated slightly.
Yeah.
As we all know, we're always finding clients that have got an application that sits on or is built on some kind of legacy stack, and it can't be upgraded because it breaks it. At that point, we're saying to them, well, you need to, how do you deal with risk? Well, you avoid it, you transfer it, you mitigate it. This is what they're doing, and you help them do that. What you can do is help them sandbox that and ring fence it.
I just wanted to pick on something else. I think I'm kind of veering and talking and more. Now, just simple fact, if we're looking at some of the numbers and facts in cybersecurity, every year the breaches are rising, cybersecurity expenditure is rising as well. And I think we are building an insurmountable mountain which we can't climb currently. And the problem is, I think, one of the problems is because we are throwing tools, people, and resources at firefighting.
Yep, reactive.
Essentially, yeah, we're just creating loads of tickets, fixing, and then fixing and fixing and fixing again.
Yep.
Now, in my mind, building partnerships with such companies as Rootshell, and working closely together, and moving away from one-time assessment or sort of, I guess, do you guys think about how you can tailor services? Because to me, what the problem is, like, yes, we can do a penetration test and assessment and get a report and find what to fix. Now, the problem is, how do we transfer the knowledge, or how do we do an understanding that preempts those problems from happening in the future? Because, and I say that, I work for a company that we have similar very platform, but we dress the same platform and build copies of it for different clients. Now, if I find this vulnerability is here, the chances are I'm going to find it here. But now, once we've done a patent testing here, how do we can transfer that knowledge so the next platform that we build, we're not introducing the same misconfigurations or vulnerabilities? And that's the key point. I think, how do we build proactive approach and learning within an organization of avoiding repeated mistakes?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, partnership. Because if you come to see me once a year and you have that once project-based siloed, assessment, then I know less about you than what I could do to make my difference to you and your situation awareness, your threat universe. Yep. What we do encourage our clients, is to go on a journey with us, because if I get to understand you, it's about getting people to talk as well, Marius.
Yeah.
We often find you've got your devs, you've got your architects, you've got, you've got your SOC, your blue team, you've got your red teams, and we're all, at times siloed. And, in a perfect world, we should all be talking to each other. We've got the collaboration. You've got the red team and the blue team, that purple team analogy, all the different colors that exist around that sort of mature testing. The devs really should be talking, to the blue teams. The red team should be talking to the architects. It's about building and then really not preempting, but then thinking ahead when you come into design or make further enrichments or, design enhancements, because there is a inherent problem, I guess, of making the same mistake again.
Yeah.
And, if you can learn from that through a partnership and build that communication, platforms can help with that, absolutely. But you can't be, a coffee, tabletop, sit down with the right people, with the right organization to have that relationship where that cybersecurity maturity grows. So communication is a very, very key thing, especially when you're trying to bring everyone to the table. Everyone's precious about their own environments. Your dev's going to be very precious. How dare you find vulnerabilities in my application? The architects and all the infrastructure that's being put together, are they talking to the application people? Are they talking about how the network works, how the flow of the data works? There's a number of questions. A lot of it happens on paper, but I don't think people actually sit down and talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot. I think communication is very, very key. So to answer your question, how do we, move forward and grow and learn? Well, it's to have it, regularly measured, have that communication flow, and bring the right teams together. Forget this idea about, oh, it's not my project, it's nothing to do with me. We're all part of this bigger piece, this bigger pie. So therefore, we all should be sharing information. So dissemination of information. Everyone understands what that ambition is of the business as well. Because if you don't have that project ambition of where we're trying to get to, or what we're trying to create, or what service we're trying to offer, people become siloed very, very quickly. And I think you lose that joined up approach. very quickly as well. So that's kind
Yeah.
of my, I've got many more, but this is what I found in the years that I've been working with clients. I like to get them to talk.
Yeah,
Let's talk about what you're doing.
I think the important part in here, as you say, I always talk to organizations about the culture you are building internally.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this, it might be controversial, but I think in partly this is security's fault itself as well. Because
Potentially. Yeah.
I always say to people, like those organizations who are going towards building DevSecOps frameworks, if you look at security as a department, it's originally, or sort of legacy point of view thinking, always used to work in sort of waterfall type of projects.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to do DevSecOps, you can't do waterfall. You
No.
have to do agile, cross-department communication, and you have to make decisions quickly in security. You can't do reviewing everything and then signing off at the end. And I think that goal is to get security to move as fast as dev and ops.
Yes.
It's very problematic, and that's why you get those silos. When you get into sort of new modern agile security engineering types of environments, it becomes easier. Now, I wanted to pick on a few. You kind of mentioned a bit about purple teaming, and I'm a big proponent of. I'll give you a few examples. One example I think that always really brings true to me. Similar to what we discussed about applications. Now, I've built many security operation centers. I wrote even my master's thesis about how to build a security operation center using MITRE ATT&CK. So I see organizations now that go and procure external SOC. It's easy, yeah, you plug everything in, blah, blah, blah. The problem is, if you completely outsource the SOC, and if you don't have internal resources or internal collaboration within the SOC, the problems you have is SOC, same as anything else, as I mentioned, risk assessment, pen testing, ABC time, it becomes out of date. It's no longer viable and covering all of your resources unless you can continuously improve. There's been, places where I've been called in, they had a pen testing service, pen testers exploited financial services or their application, and SOC didn't see anything.
Right.
And they were very concerned. But I said, look, you have to design and architect a SOC where I'm a big proponent, and like you can never fully outsource SOC in my head. You need to have one or two people who can do the business context and who can drive continuous improvement within the SOC and internal, that collaboration, provide business context of where people are traveling. What does this alert mean for us and things like that. So have you guys been sort of tasked to do this type of assessments? And then how do you sort of develop that purple type of teaming mindset to provide guidance how defense should do better?
Yeah, absolutely. So even when we're not calling it a purple team and we call it a red team engagement, there's always going to be a purple sort of team element, which is right at the end of the assessment. Quite often we'll sit down with the incident responders, the guys that are doing the detection, the bells and the whistles, because they'll have questions. Oh, you're able to do this, upload that, you had to get RC on this, we didn't see this. You know how it goes, right? So there's always going to be a good red team should always have that element in there anyway, because I think it's always good. But when you actually from the genesis of the test, and we're calling it a purple team, then that is a full collaboration between the red and the blue team. And this is where you would then almost choreograph events, campaigns, where you are looking and wanting the blue team to have that conversation with you when you are making those moves, if you like, on that red team activity. So having that relationship, for me, I would like to get the blue and the red team together for a beer before we even think about touching the keyboard. Because the idea is at this point, we get familiar with each other. There's no egos on the table anymore. Let's get rid of that. We're here to do a job. Yeah. You've got a blue team. We're the red team. We're here to make you better at detecting, or stress testing your defenses, making sure we're tweaking your bells and alarms. And how do you act when there is an alert or an event that happens on your network? And it's also good you reverse that for the red team. Now, I've got a little bit of digital forensic, I think, like yourself, background. So understanding where I might, hide, dodgy files in the registry, and I know where to not hide things anymore because, I understand that a forensics guy, he knows where, or girl knows where to look for these things. So it's all about having that, I like to call it like the coffee cup perspective. everyone's got a different vision depending on their aspect of the viewage, right? But if you can have a number of different perspectives, it really makes you a better tester. And this is where that collaboration comes in, not only for the blue team, but for the red team as well. So getting them together, getting rid of the egos. Let's understand what your capabilities are today. And then we're going to choreograph, and this would come out in some kind of scoping workshop. You'd understand what is it you're looking to stress test? How quickly can you detect, deter, degrade, and knock me off the network? This is what we want you to do. We want to help you do that. So by removing those egos, and having that collaboration, we can really start making a difference. That's a perfect purple team scenario, because at the end of it, you can both sit back and say, right, I did something, you detected it, or you shut me down pretty quickly, or I did something, you didn't detect it. Why didn't you detect it? Let's have a look at what was missing. So it's all about, sharpening teeth. It's about analyzing skills. Do we have the right tools? Are they configured in the right manner? Do I have the right skills in the team, maybe? So it's all about, again, people, process, technology.
Yeah, I think you're very right. I think it's important sometimes, even it's not only like, yes, collaboration is great, but I always say, even to like, starting out defenders, even having a few classes or few lessons of hacking allows you to get into the mindset of how hackers or attackers work. That will allow you to be a better defender, and vice versa. Now, I guess, as we kind of covered a bit, threat landscape is continuously changing and evolving. So how do you guys in Rootshell make sure that you are adaptable and covering how the threat landscape is basically evolving over?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a lot of our own in-house secret sauce, if you like, around that sort of TI. We have thousands of data points that we monitor right across from the surface web into the dark web. Not only is it, that AI, as we call it, and also the algorithms, we've also got that manual analysis that sits on there, validates, some of the information that's being brought in. So we need to make sure that the information we're enriching, potentially information that's already in the platform, for example, is absolutely validated. So we're always looking, to understand what threat actor groups are doing, what is the motivation, that political geo sort of mentality, what is actually happening out there. We're a massive advocate as well of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so we've integrated that into our platform as part of our red team and also purple team sort of testing and reporting in there. And we map and we build out certain events or campaign scenarios that we do, actions that we carry out, attack plans as part of those TTPs. So we're always looking to understand what the threat actors are doing. We're always looking to understand what technologies are potentially being targeted, looking at the temperature, the chatter, which is happening out on the bigger wide internet, and trying to understand what the flavor and the temperature is. There's always going to be, as I say, the nose of the police dog can only point in one direction at a time. But you're leveraging again AI, we're able to make sense of massive amount of data quite quickly, and we ingest that into the platform, and it makes sense of people's or clients' information, which is already in there. So, there's lots of data points to give you an answer there. There's lots of things we're doing. Not only that, if you look at at the human level as well, we have hacker get-togethers. The teams are very active on different forums, bug bounty programs. There's a lot of other things that the guys are going to. You've got all these conventions, B-sides, and various other sort of, meetups and whatnot. It's always good to learn new ways to identify things. And sometimes there's, new scripts, new exploitable tools, which aren't publicly, there's no awareness of them. But in certain places you frequent, they are there. So it's all about, as much as we are, ethical and we are legal, we also need to keep the mindset of the bad threat actor, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we need to try and help our clients defend against. And it's always going to be a challenge, because there's always going to be that ethical and legal boundary. But, if we can go and look at the things they're looking at potentially, and understand the methodology, the motivation potentially by some of these threat actor groups, we can then start to understand and begin to build a picture of how and what that landscape might look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think just going to MITRE ATT&CK, I think if those who are proponents of it, you can start tracking specific threat actor groups. You can build sort of maps, and then map the offensive techniques versus the defensive techniques that you can do. There's so much you can do with this research as well. I think it's important to be mindful and aware of geopolitical situation understand of what threat actors potentially are, at, have a chances to exploiting your industry, your, where do they sort of sharpening their tools. There's loads of, chatter happening now. I know recently that, for example, the threat actors are using sort of South America as a playground to develop their and weaponize their skills, which then potentially using on the Western world and things like that. So,
Yeah.
you know, first of all, I guess to end it all, it's amazing conversation with you, Shaun. I know we could talk probably for hours and
Absolutely.
hours, but
Yeah.
I guess just
Maybe
to end
we
it
should
all,
over a beer sometime.
yeah, I guess just to end it on, I wanted to, if you can summarize in a few sentences,
Mm,
organizations that want to potentially take their penetration testing to the next level, how they can
mhm,
find out more about Rootshell, about your services, how
mhm,
they can potentially, find out and tailor potentially, tailor their services to their needs. Who should they contact
mhm.
to talk about and find out more?
Absolutely. So first thing I would say to people is don't be scared, and don't, be healthily concerned that, that one pen test a year is probably not enough.
Yeah,
That odd scan that you might do is definitely not enough. So be aware that, there are threat actors out there that want to harm you. They want to harm people you care about and the business that you kind of run with. It's not a matter of, if, it's a matter of when. So, those that have that very, very sort of, immature sort of level of cybersecurity, we want to talk to you. Those of you who have transitioned up to that more mature level, we want to talk to you as well, because we can help organizations lift the bar, especially taking, that very first step into cybersecurity can be quite daunting.
yeah,
I've held the hand of a number of organizations from the get-go who've never or had very few sort of security assessments. They are now having full-blown red teams with us because we transitioned them
yeah,
from that first vulnerability scan to that first on-site pen test to that first phishing assessment. All these different sort of mechanisms that we do to measure their sort of people, processes, and technology, they've matured.
yeah,
And we can actually see this. We can take a step back and we can have a look at that trend of identified vulnerabilities. Okay, we're up in the game on how we're testing them. So we're finding probably more complex and aggregated issues. But those very easy, low hanging fruit criticals and highs are diminishing.
yeah,
And they are remediating things quicker because they're managing their remediation quicker. So what I'd say is, even if, you don't have you've got this idea that, a 6, 10, 12-week red team, I don't have the budget for that. Come and talk to us, because there's always going to be a red team that will fit the need, whether that's a full end-to-end, kill chain sort of, driven red team with a TI front end, so threat intelligence led testing, or it could be something more kind of honed in, like an assumed point of compromise. What could a standard user do within my cloud environment if they'd access to a VPN, maybe indicative of a developer? Or, can you get, if you were a person that got into our offices in the dark hours, were you able to, drop a USB into a box, and can you do some? There's always going to be something we can do.
yeah.
So at any level of maturity, whatever level of security testing you're doing, come and talk to us, because there's always something more that you could be doing. And it's all about making sure that you are spending your cybersecurity budget wisely, because we do hear horror stories where companies have had very little security testing, but then are sold a red team, which probably isn't going to be very valuable to them. They've probably been better off having a very solid managed vulnerability program, scanning program, and maybe some isolated penetration tests initially to get a good line in the sand, and then bring in the red team, because it's about, you could hit them with all these issues, all these identified problems, but can they fix them? Do they understand them? Can they manage the remediation? We're here to help with all that. So it's a partnership, and that's kind of how I'll leave it there, I think, because I could talk about this all day, Marish, probably gauge that, but yeah, I appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Shaun. And it's great, to having you, and I think we had a wonderful conversation, and hopefully people learn something about penetration tested and where this industry is going.
Absolutely. Yeah, the future's bright. Web3's on the dawn. We're here, blockchain. There's going to be some new and interesting vulnerabilities, I think, is going to be hitting this world very, very soon. So hold on tight. Thanks very much,
Brilliant.
Marius. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shaun.
Thank you.